Okay, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Committee done virtually due to the current coronavirus restrictions on public gatherings. I'd like to refer members and officers to published protocols of holding virtual meetings, noting members to have their video on at all times, but to put the microphone on mute unless they are speaking. In the case of a technical problem, the meeting would adjourn until it is resolved. If a member loses connection, the meeting will adjourn until reconnected. If technical problems persist and the meeting is in quorum, the meeting will be abandoned to a later date. And I'd like to remind members to state when they're voting, I have heard the discussion and I vote to grant or refuse the application. This meeting is being streamed live. It's also being video and audio recorded and will be available to watch and listen to on the website. Attendance by reserved members.
I'm sorry, Chairman, can I just say that I've had a phone call from a local resident who wants to watch this meeting, and she said that it only lasted for 3 minutes and now she can't see it anymore. I don't know if that's a general problem, but I thought I'd raise it. Perhaps our technical people can help with that. Thank you.
There should be somebody watching the live stream on the internet to see if we've lost any of the proceedings to the general public. I don't know whether Andre has got any more information.
Well, according to this lady, we have, but she might be wrong. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Councillor Terry. Councillor Ashton, just to step in, we're monitoring the live feed and it's live at the moment, so there's been no communication break. If she just wants to visit the council website and make sure she's on the right link for us, thank you.
Okay, can we go back to Kieran?
Thank you. I am reserving for Simon Brown.
Thank you very much. I just go around the people that are present in this meeting. I'm Councillor Keith Ferry and I'm the chair of the Planning Committee. I think Gasamp is there somewhere.
Yes, it's Councillor Furley.
And Sachin?
Yeah, Councillor Sachin Shah here.
And we've heard from Kieran. So Marilyn?
Yes, I'm Councillor Marilyn Ashton. I'm the Conservative spokesman on the committee.
Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, and I'm a member of the committee.
And Anjana?
Councillor Anjana Patel, and I'm the member of the committee.
Would the officers like to introduce themselves?
Yes, Chair, I'm Beverly Kusha. I'm the Interim Chief Planning Officer.
Good evening, members. My name is Orla Murphy. I am the Head of Development Management.
Good evening, members. Nabil Kasmani. I'm a Principal Planning Officer in DM.
Good evening, members. I'm Nicola Rankin. I'm a Principal Planning Officer in Development Management.
Good evening, members. I am Bettina Aneke. I am the team leader for East Area team.
Okay, are there anybody from Legal Services present?
Good evening, Councillor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes. Can you introduce yourself?
Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Hello.
We can, yes. Yes.
Oh, yes, sorry. This is Mrinalini Rajaratnam from HP Public Law. I'm your legal advisor for the day.
Okay. And from Democratic Services. Who's from Democratic Services?
Good evening, Councillor. We have Wim Chella, who's the Committee Administrator, and Elaine McEachron.
Okay. Is there anybody else present from officers of the Council? Okay, item 2 on the agenda, right of members to speak. I have been informed that Councillor Stephen Greek would like to address us on item 206, the Hijat Primary School, and also on item 209, land fronting Uxbridge Road. That's the Bannister Adventure Golf Development. Councillor Norman Stevenson would like to address us on item 202, which is Sun Court, Mayfield Drive, Harrow. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Yes. Okay.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. The declarations of interest have been published on the website. We have not received any pecuniary interests. So if we move on to item 4, the meeting held on the 17th of June 2020, can the minutes be agreed and signed as a correct record at a later date?
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, I'll take that as agreed. Item 5, we have a public question from Mr. Mark Malvina. Is he present? Andre, do we know if Mr. Mark Malvina is present?
Councillor Ferry is not joining the meeting.
Okay, in which case I'll read out the letter, the question. When an applicant has quoted from previous planning committees in a current planning application being made, does the committee think that if somebody wants to also have access to these documents so that they can possibly make a comment or objection, and that if this information is not provided by the council before the closing date for comments or objections, despite that request being made over 1 month before the closing date for objections, then have the council officers responsible for providing the information contributing to maladministration of the planning process? As you see, that's a very nebulous sort of question. My response is that all documents relating to planning applications should be on the public website. That includes current planning applications and previous planning applications. As I've been informed that officers, when they're viewing a planning application, will only consider the documents that have been sent in relation to that planning application and will not cross-reference to any previous planning application. And I would also say that any documents or letters that have resulted from a pre-application discussion between an applicant and planning officers is not public information and is therefore doesn't appear on the website. I have a problem if I'm asking for a supplementary question because I can't think of one. So in that case, we move on to item 6, petitions. None have been notified. Does anybody have any petitions to present? I don't see any. Item 7, deputations. None have been notified. Item 8, references from council and other committees and panels. None have been notified. There are 2 addendums. There is a addendum and supplementary items for Hermitage Gate, Clamp Hill, and there's a supplemental addendum. Are we happy to receive those addendums? Yes.
Agreed, Chair.
Good.
Yep.
Okay.
Yes. Yep.
We've got quite a lot to consider tonight, so we're going to take, as usual, any applications where we have an objector and an applicant to address us. Therefore, the first item will be 201, then 202, 206, 209, 210, and 102. Those being the 6 items where we have members of the public involved. And then we will move on to 101, 203, 205, 207, and 208. There is no site visit at the present moment, so that doesn't apply. Representation on planning applications. On item 102, Prince Edward Playing Field, Sean Mcgrath, who's the applicant. 16 Northwick Park Road, 201, Lisa Morrison, Youssef Mzawa, and British Shashdev. 202, Shazia Akhtar. We've already agreed, Councillor Norman Stevenson should backbench on that. 206, the Hujat Primary School, Majelabad, the objector, and then David Paul, the head teacher, and Shaheen Hidri, who will be a backup speaker should we not be able to contact David Paul. Councillor Stephen Greek is backbenching on that. 209, land fronting Uxbridge Road, forming part of Bannister's Outdoor Sports Centre, item 209. Brian Stoker, the objector. Pierre Dowsett, who is the applicant and agent, and I believe he's not been able to be present, and he sent me something to read out at that item. Councillor Stephen Greek backbenching, and 210 Hermitage Gate, Clamp Hill. Roger Birtles is the applicant, and Richie Sellers is the architect. Are we happy to receive those representations? Yes.
Agreed.
Yes, yep.
Okay. Yep. Right. For the benefit of anybody that hasn't attended a planning committee before, the process to be followed is that first of all, there will be a presentation by officers, and due to the full programme, I'd like to ask officers to keep that presentation to the very minimum to inform us of any changes that have occurred since we had briefings on Monday and Tuesday evening. We will then ask questions to the officers. The objectors and applicants will have 3 minutes each to address us, and backbenchers will have 5 minutes each. There will be some discussion on the application, and then we will vote on the recommendation. So without further ado, if we could move into 201 16 Northwick Park Road presentation.
Sorry, Councillor, is that me? Am I speaking now?
That's you, Ola.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just in the process of sharing my screen. May I just check that everyone can see what's on the screen at the moment?
Yes.
Thank you. Good evening, members. I'm here to present the application for 16 Northwick Park Road. This application relates to a property which has been converted historically from a dwelling house to a community care home. That permission was established back in 1995, so the use has been established for 25 years. The report will note that in 2016 there was a further change of use to permit respite care in the centre, and there is a limit to 40 users on the site. The application before Planning Committee this evening is for the construction of an outbuilding in the rear garden to house a sensory room. The outbuilding would be located adjacent to an existing wooden shed in the garden. The outbuilding proposed is located here, showing you on this block plan. The depth of the outbuilding would be 4 metres, it would be 7.5 metres wide and 2.5 metres tall. The proposal is to house a sensory room, and the application confirms that essentially the insides of the structure would be blacked out, And I've lifted an image from the submitted design and access statement that the applicant has provided to give you an indication of the type of use that the outbuilding would be for. You will note that from the history in the report that there have been previous planning applications for this outbuilding, but they were refused. I believe there were 3 of them because at the time of dealing with those planning applications, we had insufficient information regarding what the use was for, whether there would be any additional occupiers as a result of this application. And the design and access statement now has been submitted with a noise mitigation report. It has confirmed that there is going to be no additional users, that this sensory room facility would be for existing users of the site. There would be a maximum of 4 occupiers at any one time, plus a carer. We have considered the information that has been submitted as part of this application, and we have recommended the application for grant subject to a number of conditions on page 101. And specifically, I'd just like to draw your attention to condition 4, which requires the building to be used incidentally to the daycare home and for it not to be used independently of it, and that the use of the outbuilding should only occur between 8 AM and 8 PM Monday to Sunday. We've also put on a condition to ensure that no music or any other amplified sound caused as a result of the permission could be audible at the boundaries of the property, and that no air conditioning units or plant is installed without further planning permission. These conditions have been recommended at the request of our environmental health colleagues in order to protect neighbouring residential amenities. We are satisfied that subject to those conditions, that the proposal is appropriate development in the area. It would not result in an unacceptable harm in residential amenity, and all of the objections that have been received have been set out in the report and addressed accordingly. The application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions in the officer's report, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Orla. Are there any questions? I don't see any hands being raised. Cassandra.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Actually, just because I'm sure that everybody received a lot of emails from the local residents, and the main issue is not everybody was sent letters for consultation, and many of the residents really are annoyed, and they said that all the surrounding neighbors should have sent consultation letters, because there's always complaints against this place, and residents requested, because they didn't have all the consultation, so it should be deferred until all the residents should be taken into confidence. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. Orla.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to clarify the point about the notifications of the letters to residents. So, as you know, the agenda for Planning Committee isn't finalised until 5 working days before the Planning Committee itself. So there's only a very short window for us to be able to send letters out to objectors, as we do for every Planning Committee. And typically those letters are sent out on either the Thursday or the Friday following the publication of the agenda on the Wednesday. It came to our attention on Friday that the staff member who would usually send those letters had fallen ill and was unable to continue working. So as a result of that, acknowledging that the fact that had the letters been sent on Thursday, the letters would not have reached the residents until Monday, Saturday potentially, if they'd gone out early. But what we did on Monday morning, first thing, was send emails to the residents that we had emails for, and or phoned them if we had phone numbers. And for the residents who we didn't have phone numbers for or email addresses, we ran the letters, and somebody from the Civic Centre hand delivered them. So we believe that process, whilst is it's not an oversight in that respect, but we don't believe that there has been any prejudiced interest in that respect. We have received the objections from the neighbours. You know, there are 8 or 9 of them, I believe. We recognise that this is a contentious planning application, and that's the reason why this application has been presented to a public forum for it to be decided by a planning committee. And the objections raised have been set out in the report and addressed, and we have a member of the public registered to speak this evening. So in that respect, I believe that there hasn't been any prejudicial impact.
Thanks, Ola. But again, we have to listen, because I'm being the ward councillor. So I have been contacted by many residents. You know, so I think they should be given a chance to do a petition and to properly consult an objection. So I should be given another chance. So this is why I might request to defer this application for next meetings, so all the residents can be satisfied. Thank you.
I think Elsa had her hand up.
Hi, good evening. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the being given for the first time, to object. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Can you hear me? Yes. The last opportunity to object was in March, I believe, at the start of lockdown. I received my letter only a day before the deadline. So this isn't something that's isolated to this one occasion. It's happened before, and from my neighbours, I understand it's happened prior to that too. So it seems to be repeatedly occurring.
Councillor Ferry, may I speak? This is Marina Leaney, the legal advisor. Councillor Ferry, may I speak?
Yes, please do.
The legal requirement is a site notice or individual letters. So from that perspective, if a site notice has gone up, that would be sufficient.
Okay. Well, I think as we've had 8 objections received, we can consider those objections, and I'm sure that Elsa will provide us some more information when she speaks. Does anybody else wish to ask a question? No? In which case, can I ask and invite Elsa Morrison to speak for 3 minutes, please?
Thank you. When we first consulted about this home being established in the first instance, I would like to see the document that was originally sent to the residents of the application, as none of us can recollect receiving it. Why has the same proposal been allowed so many times? Why has the administration regarding residents being informed been so poor? We either have little to no notice, negative notice, as in the objection letter is sent after the deadline, or no notice at all. Are you aware of the 9 objections? If so, how can you seek to grant this application when each objection addresses the development plan criteria and demonstrates how lives are being adversely affected by the breaches of this plan? We've shown how our property's amenities, roads and noise levels are affected currently, and how we anticipate this worsening. This facility has no parking at its current size and operation, and this is a huge problem in terms of road safety, pollution. More daycare clients will be brought here, presenting more of an issue than we currently have. How could this be approved by Highways? I have had, prior to the pandemic, up to 4 full-size buses parked in a row outside my house in both directions, all the way up and down the street. It's unsafe, it's unsightly, environmentally unfriendly, affects house prices and personally my mental health. How have they demonstrated that they will eliminate the noise nuisance? The noise mostly happens in the early hours between 5 and 7 a.m. The residents themselves seem very distressed and this concerns us. Moving the noise to the back after 8 a.m, as the approval you grant states, will not help. Neighbours on the roadside will still be woken at ungodly hours and neighbouring residents at the rear will still be disturbed presumably all day until 8 p.m. Noise data supplied but not shared after the last refusal was, I understand, the reason this application received grant status, but due to the time of use, it will not help at all. How have they demonstrated they will stop clients from leaving the premise and posing a threat to the neighbours and themselves? I personally witnessed on the 25th of January this year, a young man running past my house, screaming and seemingly terrified, being chased on foot and by a bus. He was captured and then virtually dragged back in front of my young son and I. It was extremely disturbing to see. I've read numerous other incidents of far more concerning natures regarding the breaks in security. My own planning application received 1 objection and that was denied. This proposal has had 9 objections, but yet it receives grant status. Why? This street is home to many families with young children and elderly. We no longer feel safe or at peace. I cannot see how you can possibly justify granting this proposal when the current situation affects the immediate community so negatively. We feel like our lives don't matter. And just at one point I need to make an addition. There are residents that are brought on a daily basis to the home that use the facilities and then are taken back. It's not just the residents who are housed there overnight. So the numbers will expand from what I personally have seen. I know somebody who uses the facility during the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Elsa. Is Yusuf present from the applicant?
Hello, Chair. Yes.
Okay, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that the proposal, in terms of its structure, is completely acceptable in terms of its scale. We concur with the findings of the case officer. The proposal is for a sensory room. The purpose of the sensory room is to help people with learning difficulties. They will be supervised, the door will be shut and the windows will be sealed. The proposal would not actually result in the intensification of the use of the site at all, contrary to what you've heard. We have also suggested planning conditions limiting the number of people. Maximum of 5 people will enter this building, and that includes a carer. You've heard about house prices being affected. That is not a planning consideration. And what we're seeking permission for has nothing to do with although it's ancillary, what is before members this evening is not the main use of the site. That's already been approved, and this is a completely separate proposal, albeit ancillary to the main use of the site. The proposal has been supported by a noise impact assessment. We've addressed all issues arising from the previous applications. We've provided a noise impact assessment. Environmental health are happy with that. Highways officers have found the scheme to be acceptable, and we believe that the proposal complies with the provisions of the development plan. We've resubmitted this application with the additional information to ensure that residents are not adversely impacted, and we find the conditions proposed by officers wholly acceptable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any officers that wish to respond to what's just been said? No. Okay, are there any comments from members of the committee? I can't see any. Okay, then we shall. Xantha.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've just listened to the applicant comments, but over the years there has been a lot of complaints by the residents, and our officers have been dealing with those complaints, and I don't know how we can be assured that there won't be any noise or other complaints, because they can't even control their daycare if, with the mental health coming in. As the lady said, that a young chap was dragged, and I think there was a recent incident also. I haven't got the email in front of me, so I would like to really consider these things before we grant the application. Thank you.
Okay, Marilyn.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I really do completely understand what the residents had to endure, and I completely agree that it could be upsetting, not least because of the nature of some of the people that use this facility, which must give quite a considerable respite to the families, particularly people living at home. But everybody, I think, on this committee would sympathise with the comments that have been made by the objector. But the problem is with this, is that we're looking at a building in the garden that will be an additional facility ancillary to the main use of the already granted permission. But what we can't do is unpick the already granted permission. We're not being asked to. All we're being asked to do is look at an outbuilding, which is not a huge building, and it's nicely designed, and it's 2.5 metres tall. It's not going to be particularly obtrusive, which is heavily conditioned, and that outbuilding will be used as a sensory room, and very limited by its number of people that can go in, and as we've heard, the hours of use are also limited. This doesn't make the rest of the problems go away, but equally I don't suppose it will make them worse either. And so what we have to do on this committee is look at what's in front of us, and not try and unpick that which has already been approved, even if, and I'm not disputing it, it's causing some upsets. Whether or not those upsets constitute a nuisance, whether or not those upsets could be perhaps dealt with by environmental health legislation is another matter. I'm not saying it is, I'm just suggesting that that is a separate issue. We don't repeat things in this council. This is the planning committee. But maybe that would be a way of making sure that people are not disturbed. But as regards this one application for what is not a particularly large building in the garden, which will provide some very worthwhile facilities for the people of this care home, I personally cannot find any grounds to refuse it as material planning considerations are concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Kieran.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say I agree with what Councillor Ashton just said. I think the additional space at the back of the garden will improve the services for the existing users of the centre, and I think that's a good thing. And I think with the conditions that are attached, it won't make the current issues any worse. I do agree that some of the issues that you're facing in the road absolutely need to be looked at. And it sounds very serious, and I'm sure your local councillors and council officers are supporting you in that, and I hope they continue to do so, because it does sound like they do need to be sorted. But on this application, it sounds like the benefit of the extra room outweighs any extra inconvenience that it would cause in the road. So I think it should be sorted. Thank you.
Thank you, Kieran. Sachin?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to agree with both Marilyn and Kieran and say fairly some things. I do sympathise with Elsa and the comments made and the issues faced, but we cannot. That is not something that we can look at. We need to look at planning matters, and your ward councillors are here, and I'm no doubt, I know that they work hard for Greenhill, and no doubt those issues will be dealt with separately. On this application itself, I haven't seen or heard anything that would give planning reasons to refuse this application. So while I sympathise with the objectors, I will be voting to support this application.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can now move to the vote, and I'll start off. I have heard the whole of the discussion, and I vote to grant the application. Gazanfa.
It's Councillor Gazanfa Ali. I've heard all the discussion, and I really vote to stay absent.
Okay, Kieran.
I have heard all of the discussion and I am voting to grant the application.
Sachin.
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussion. I vote to grant.
Marilyn.
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Jana?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Okay, thank you all. So I think it's NEMCON, that application is granted. And we move on to application number 202, which is Suncourt Mayfield Drive, Harrow. And that's on page 113 of the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. That's me again. If you just bear with me, I will share the presentation. Could you please confirm that you can see the screen, please?
We can.
Thank you. So the application for Suncourt Mayfield Drive is reported to Planning Committee again due to the level of public interest. We've received numerous objections to the application. I just want to draw members' attention to the addendum which was issued earlier. There have been some revisions to the plans showing the correctly notified front elevation. The plans which were in the appendix on the report were the plans that had been superseded. But I do want to confirm that we did send out re-notification letters to the residents at the beginning of May on these revised drawings, and these are the drawings that have been considered in the report. There has also been one slight change in the drawings in that there was a chimney proposed on the western elevation, which was more of a decorative feature. It wasn't a fully working chimney, but based on some further consideration of that particular element, it was considered that that was unacceptable and unnecessary. So that has been removed from the plans. So the addendum just seeks to update that, update the condition with the amended drawing number. There is also one further objection received, which has been set out in the addendum material. All of the matters raised have been considered in the report, so therefore there was nothing further to add in that respect. Suncourt is located on the northern side of Mayfield Drive. Mayfield Drive itself is there isn't a standardised pattern of development. You have a mixture of two-storey dwelling houses with brick and render. You've got chalet bungalows, as you can see, and you've got mock Tudor style dwellings. And as you can see, there's an eclectic pattern of layouts. Suncourt itself is set quite significantly back from the road, whereas the house to the east is set further forward, but is on a wedge-shaped plot due to the corner. Along the western boundary, and this location is the Tooks Green Conservation Area. So all of these houses and their back gardens are in the adjacent conservation area. The proposal is to demolish this front projection and to do a 2-storey front extension. The proposal also seeks to amend an existing first floor elevation in this location here, where there is currently a cap slide roof, and lift the roof up so that it becomes more of a subordinate traditional style hipped roof. There is a single-storey side extension on the side and a single-storey rear extension. The drawings that are on the screen now show you the extent of the development. So this is where the cap side roof is to be replaced. There's a proposed front dormer, 2 rear dormers, there's a rear extension and the side extension. And the scope of the extensions in terms of what's new are laid out in red on the drawing, so you can clearly differentiate between the two. So the application has been assessed in relation to character and appearance and the setting of the conservation area. We are satisfied that there isn't any harm in that respect. In relation to amenity considerations, this has been explored in the report. There isn't any detrimental impact in terms of outlook or overbearing impact, and as well as that, we are satisfied that there isn't any harm in relation to overshadowing or loss of light. The proposal meets all of the parameters of the supplementary planning document in relation to householder extensions. There isn't any detrimental harm in relation to flood risk or drainage. The application has been recommended for approval. I just want to table a recommendation that I would like to be considered in relation to one of the conditions, which is condition number 4. In that the condition number 4 requires that the windows in the eastern flank wall of the extension are obscurely glazed, but I'd also like to add western. So on the western side of the application, there are secondary windows. There's a secondary window there leading to a dressing area or an ensuite bathroom, and there's also some windows on the bottom which would be obscured from overlooking, but I just think adding an additional element in relation to the condition would address any perceived impacts in relation to loss of light, overlooking, I beg your pardon. So subject to the recommendations and the conditions, the application is recommended for grant.
Thank you, Orla. Are there any questions to officers? I can't see any at this stage, so could I invite Shazia Akhtar to address us?
Yes, very quickly, the presentation that Orla's just given is wrong in one important respect. She has stated that there was an additional objection received post that report being produced. That's not the case. I, in fact, am the resident at 7 Elms, which if you are able to look back at the screen and the view of the property, I am the closest neighbour to Suncourt, the property in question. And my objections were sent in on the 22nd of May. However, they were not considered and they were not placed on the public portal. I chased this up in June and I had no response. On Monday afternoon, I received an email along with other objectors stating that planning had been approved on the basis of the report and giving us very little time in which to respond to today's meeting, which I consider to be unfair. However, I also chased the fact that when I read the report, there was no specific mention at all of loss of light or overshadowing. And so whilst Orla has spoken to that now before you, if you look at the report, my concerns are not addressed. They're not addressed at all within the summary. So I would like the committee to consider the fact that those concerns weren't addressed and that my my objections were crucial, considering I'm the closest neighbour. So it's not enough for the addendum, which I wasn't given sight of, but I've managed to find in the couple of hours before the meeting, which simply states additional objection received. It's not an additional objection, as I stated. It was sent in within time and it just wasn't considered within the main report. And it says, raising the following concerns, and it simply says, officer comments, all these matters are considered and addressed within the report. They are not, as I've said, and I'd like Orla perhaps to point out where loss of light and overshadowing within the main report have been mentioned. That's caused us real prejudice, and therefore on that basis, I don't consider that the report that you have before you is enough for you to make a decision, notwithstanding the concessions that have just been made, which I would accept in their entirety in relation to the obscuring of windows on the eastern and western flanks. Even if you don't accept what I'm saying, and I would really urge you to, the substantive report contains factual errors and fails to understand or address fully the objections raised by neighbouring properties, of which there are many, nor does it take into consideration the views of the Conservation Area Advisory Committee. I have sent in a written objection to the current process, which I don't know if the committee members have been past that.
Okay, thank you very much.
So I'd like you to consider that. And I would conclude by saying that I think the best course of action is for this to be postponed and a proper report considered, which looks at the loss of light and overshadowing. Our garden is north facing, and the creation of a very substantial double-storey extension to the front and to the side is going to cause a great loss of light and overshadowing. That's just not been dealt with. We also have questions from the residents. They seek assurances that the property will not be used for commercial purposes, because we understand that the applicant is a dentist, and that their views in relation to loss of privacy and amenity are taken into account. They've also asked for information in respect of the estimated length of the build. We'd like to know if a site visit has been conducted, and if not, has a 360-degree video been used to inform the planning report. Again, I'd ask why the report hasn't made any mention of loss or light or overshadowing. It's simply not enough for Orla to just mention that today to you, because it hasn't been considered. Why my objections were not considered when they ought to have been fully within the report, and what the local policy is on extensions to the frontage of properties, and whether what the double-storey extension of the garage, what will that room be used for? Because it's not clear from the plans that have been submitted. You simply can't read the plans, they're too small. Even when you enlarge them, you just can't read what the room usage is.
Thank you for that. Orla, do you wish to reply to any of that?
Sure, I can reply. So in relation to the room, it's labelled as a bedroom. The application is a householder planning application. Should the applicant wish to use it for business purposes, then they would be required to apply for planning permission for change of use from residential to business use. I acknowledge that the report perhaps is a little bit thin in relation to discussing overshadowing and loss of light. But what it does do is it refers to the 45-degree code. And if you refer to the 45-degree code in the householder SPD, the purpose of the 45-degree code is to ensure an acceptable relationship between buildings, to ensure that there isn't an overbearing impact or loss of light, which is why I did address that in my verbal comments. In relation to the orientation of the property, it is acknowledged that it is, the rear gardens face north. So obviously the rear elevations of the properties in terms of the rooms within the rooms facing the gardens would perhaps be, they wouldn't receive the best light aspects. But the situation is at the moment that Sun Court and this lady's house are sited very unusually, in that they're very, very stepped. So Sun Court is in the latter 2/3 of the site, whereas this lady's property is further forward in the street scene. So that's an existing situation. So clearly, when an application for a planning extensions to a householder comes through, we need to assess the application against our supplementary planning document. We recognise that applications more often than not will have some form of harm, but and then when we assess the applications, we assess them against the guidelines to ensure that that the harm is not unreasonable. So we have looked at the application. We do understand that there is going to be an element of change, but we have to determine whether or not that change is unreasonable, and we've come to the conclusion that in this instance that it isn't. If I just refer you to paragraph 6.3.4, that part of the report does actually refer to the 45-degree angle in relation to like the impacts on 7 Elms in particular, which is the house that we're talking about. So in terms of the objection letter, so the letter was on the system and it was picked up earlier this week, hence the reason why it was reported on the addendum. We've said an additional objection has been received. That's an additional objection in addition to what has been reported in the reports. So rather than, I'm just referring back to the relevant parts of the reports, rather than 18, we have 19. Essentially, so paragraph 4.2 says 18 objections have been received, so now this would be 19 objections. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Have we got Norman Stevenson on the line?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Hello,
Thank you.
Norman. I'll give you 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Right. Thank you, committee, for letting me speak. I know you've got a very busy agenda today. I think this is very important. I'm actually speaking in opposition, really, to this application. I'd like it to be refused. I think we've just heard, actually, an example there. It's not the first time we've heard. We heard it earlier in this meeting, but at previous planning meetings, of residents not actually having their objections recorded properly, or sometimes not receiving letters about proposals. And we really must get this process sorted. We've got great planning officers in Harrow, but there are problems with the system. It's such a shame at the moment you can't do a site visit, and I think that this is exactly the sort of road where you should be doing it. It's a very small road. There's only about 8 properties from my recollection, and this particular property is at the highest point in this small road. The changes proposed are going to have a considerable impact, and they're going to be visible not just in this road and the adjoining roads, but it's going to negatively affect the skyline for lots of residents in this road, Mayfield Drive, but many around. And the new dormer windows, for example, on the front and back are going to encroach on the privacy of neighbouring properties, and I would urge the committee to have this aspect looked at into, please. The proposal does involve the loss of garage space, so will inevitably have a detrimental impact on parking. I'm not sure that's really being considered sufficiently, and overall the proposal is excessive and an overdevelopment on a plot which is adjoining the conservation area, as has been pointed out. This part about the conservation area I think is quite key. The proposal, in my view, clearly doesn't enhance the nearby conservation area. It's out of character and it's highly visible, so it will be detrimental to the Two Green conservation area. So I would urge the committee to reject this application. And I just want to say, I mean, the resident that's just spoken, I've spoken to lots of residents in this road and adjoining roads about this, but you've had a resident who actually lives next door, and her initial response to this wasn't picked up by the council. I know it was latterly, but it doesn't really instill confidence, unfortunately. So I really think I think this one should be looked at again. I'd like it to be put aside tonight and reconsidered in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Are there any comments from members of the committee? Marilyn.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Chairman, I think it is a shame, and I think Councillor Stevenson is right, that people lack confidence in our processes and that their objections are not logged in the right way. It always makes people very nervous when they think that we're not performing as we should, and that our processes are wanting. I think that we need to, as Councillor Stevens said, shape up a bit there. I mean, I get a lot of complaints about that, and I'm sure we all do. What is very striking to me about this is that I don't really think, and please forgive me, I'm not being disrespectful at all or personal to anyone, but I don't really think that the case officer has done a particularly thorough job in compiling the report. You can always tell that when there's lots of changes on the addendum to try and fix that which has been left out on the main report. And of course, the objector is right, because the main report is published 5 days before the meeting, and whereas the addendum is only published on the day of the meeting or the night before. So this doesn't really give people a chance to properly digest any changes, like, for example, taking what was an extraordinarily unpleasant looking chimney away. Chairman, I'm not happy with this proposal, and I was quite interested that the CAAC, who don't always comment on things, we're pretty sure that the front dormer would be detrimental to the character and appearance of the conservation area. Therefore, to cut to the quick, I'm going to be proposing refusal, and I shall, these are the reasons. The extensions would be out of keeping, or poorly designed, and or visually obtrusive, and would not preserve or enhance the character and appearance and the setting of the Tewkesbury Conservation Area, which this site abuts, contrary to 1B of the core strategy and 7.4B, 7.6B, 7.8B, and 7.8D of the 2016 London Plan, D1 and D4 of the Draft London Plan, and DM1 and DM7 of the Harrow Development Management Policies 2013. Chairman, I do hope that others see this the same way. And I would like to finish by saying that I didn't know this area very well, and so I did take the trouble to just have a little drive up there to have a look at it myself. We don't have to do a formal visit and get in a van and we'll get together, particularly at the moment. That wouldn't be a good idea. But there isn't anything to stop us making our own way to have a look at things that come to the committee, so that we know what we're talking about. And honestly, Chair, if anyone had seen what I saw when I visited, they would be quite clear that this is an unacceptable development and should not be granted. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Anjana?
Chairman, I just wanted to let you know that Councillor Chris Baxter is having a technical problem. So he had to come out of the Teams and he'll have to go back in again. And I would just like to second the refusal that Councillor Marilyn Ashton has just proposed. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. It looks like overbearing and overdevelopment as compared to the neighbouring properties. It's pity that you can't visit the site due to epidemic, and I don't know how long it's going to stay. It wouldn't be a big picture, but looking at the report and listening to objectors, it's overdevelopment as compared to the neighbouring properties. So that's my comments, and I'll.
All right, we have a motion for refusal then. So if we vote on the motion, I'll go first.
Chairman, is Councillor Baxter back, just out of interest, before we go to a vote?
I can see him
Right, if
on
you
the
want-
bottom right hand corner of my screen. No doubt he'll confirm that he is back soon. So I will vote against the motion for refusal. Gasemfa.
Councillor Ghazanfar Ali, I've heard all the discussion and proceedings, and I will vote to refuse.
Sachin.
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the proceedings and I vote against the proposal to refuse.
And Kieran.
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani, I've heard the whole of the discussion and I vote against the motion to refuse.
And Marilyn.
Thank you, Chairman. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse.
Christopher, welcome back.
Thank you. I think I have missed a part of the discussion, so I'm not sure what to do here. I was out of the room.
I don't actually think you missed very much, actually.
Councillor Ferry, if Councillor has missed part of the discussion or the debate, either we repeat what he has missed or he abstains from voting. He doesn't vote.
How do we work out what he's missed?
We'd have to defer. I wouldn't be prepared to accept.
Okay, I think, Christopher, you're going to have to abstain in that case.
What did you miss, Christopher?
So I think all of Norman Stevens, Councillor Stevenson speaking. I was out. I know I was out of the room then.
I feel very strongly about this, and I think this would be highly challengeable. We always say that if we have a technical problem, that we have to either cancel the meeting or defer any item that's
Sorry, it's Councillor Sachin Shah. I don't agree with Marilyn, because the whole point of us saying that bit before we vote, I've heard all the discussion, is to confirm that. You know, so I mean, actually, had it not been mentioned by Councillor Patel, we wouldn't have known that Chris was out of the room. So you know, that it was made aware to us by Councillor Patel. That's not our fault, but now we are aware of it. I don't think Chris can vote. Sorry, it's nothing against you, Chris, but
we'd have a legal challenge, Chair, and I would recommend very strongly that if this is the case, and I accept that it would be, because Christopher has obviously ruled himself out through no fault of his own, but we either rerun it tonight or rerun it another time. But what we mustn't do is not have a full complement of people, because in this instance, Councillor Baxter was ruled out of participating in this meeting because of a failure of our system, our team system. And in that case, it's nothing to do with him domestically. In that case, I don't think that we can go ahead. I feel very strongly about that, and I would recommend very strongly legally that we don't do that. We either rerun it or we defer it and rerun it another time.
Well, we're still quorate, even though Christopher disappeared for a while. And it's exactly the same as if somebody had decided that they would walk out during a discussion and they were not allowed to vote when they came back in.
No, it's not.
No, I didn't choose to walk out though. I'm accessing this meeting on a council device, and the technical issues, I didn't cause them.
Can we have a legal opinion?
But if it changes, What changes the outcome?
Just a minute, Marilyn, I've asked for a legal opinion. Be quiet.
The legal opinion would be that he cannot vote, but it will be for you to decide, councillor, whether you want to defer it or not, considering whether it would be fair by the objectors and the applicant.
Well, I rule that it's fair that we do vote on it, and that Christopher therefore is abstaining. So we go on to Angela's vote.
Chairman, I'm sorry, but if you do this and people can afford it and they will judicially review this, it will cost us a lot of money.
Marilyn, I've asked for Angela's vote.
I've heard all the discussion and I heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse the application.
Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3 refusals and 3 people against the refusals and 1 abstention. Does anybody have any other figures than that? No. Okay, it is then down for my casting vote, and I vote to refuse the application to refuse. So if we move then on to the main vote for approval, I approve. I've heard all of the discussion and I vote to approve the application. Stamper.
Councillor Ali, I've heard all the discussion and proceeding and I vote to refuse.
Okay, Sachin.
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussion. I vote to approve the application.
Kieran.
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to approve the application.
Marilyn.
Chairman, your behaviour is disgraceful, but because I think we're going to have a lot of legal problems, and I would urge the people watching this to get in touch with a lawyer on
Marilyn, would you like to vote?
Yes.
It's not time for a discussion. Please vote.
The application, having heard all the discussion. Your behaviour is a disgrace.
And Christopher, you can't vote. You'd have to abstain. And Jana.
I heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse the application.
So in that case, by my reckoning, we've got 3 votes to refuse to the application or to not approve the application, 3 votes to approve the application, 1 abstention. My casting chair's vote is to approve the application. So the application is refused, is approved and granted. And we move on to item 206, which is Kujat Primary School, and it's on page 213 of the agenda.
Somebody has raised their hand. I don't know who it is. Somebody has raised their hand.
Marilyn, I'm in charge of the proceedings. I'll decide who's speaking. The person that's raised their hand is the objector. They have had 3 minutes to talk to us, and therefore that is not an acceptable contribution. Can we move on to 206?
Thank you, Chair. Just bear with me, I'll bring up the presentation. Can you confirm that you're able to see that on your screen, please?
We can, yes.
Okay. So members will note there are some addendum items for this proposal. Following concerns relating to highway safety, some additional comments have been sought from the Highways Authority, who have advised that the council does employ civil enforcement officers who could deal with any parking contraventions in relation to the proposal, and that it would be placed on the priority list for CCTV vehicle patrols. Also, an additional informative has been added to encourage the school to liaise with the owners of the Little Car Park in Harrow Weald, to explore the possibility of an arrangement of a car park drop-off area. So the application proposal relates to a two-storey former college building. The application site is situated within the Greenbelt and lies adjacent to a site of importance for nature conservation. The proposal is for minor works to the building and its external curtilage to facilitate a co-educational preschool for 420 pupils. The minor alterations would include new windows and doors, new boundary treatments, external hard and soft landscaping, including the provision of a multi-use games area to the southern part of the site. The educational use of the building and the site is long established. Planning permission is not required to change the use of the building to the school, and this has been established through the grant of a certificate of lawfulness. So the proposal is not considered to give rise to any conflicts with Greenbelt policies. It's considered to have an acceptable impact on the character and appearance of the area and the locally listed building, subject to agreeing details of the louvers that are to be installed on some of the windows. In respect of the multi-use games area, this would be sited approximately 50 metres from the nearest residential facade. The officers are recommending conditions restricting the hours of use of the mugger during the day and for provision of a noise management plan. The multi-use games area would also include provision of a 2.4 metre acoustic fence. And subject to ensuring that these are implemented through planning conditions, it's considered to have an acceptable impact on the amenities of the adjacent properties. The application has been referred to the Council's Environmental Health Department, who haven't raised any objection to the application in this regard. So the application is recommended for approval subject to conditions. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Are there any questions? I don't see any. Can we then invite Magella Bard to address us for 3 minutes?
Sure. Hello, Councillor Ferry. Thanks very much for taking the time. Yeah, can
you just introduce yourself first?
Yeah, of course, and I will. So yeah, I'm Magella Bade, and I'm one of the residents that is immediately adjacent to the proposed school, and I'm here to represent the residents on Brooks Hill, many of which have lived on Brooks Hill for many years, and they very much value the openness and rural character of this road. The residents have been engaging a stakeholder group, a representative stakeholder group, over the last few months, including school representatives, Department of Education. And we do feel actually that progress has been made with respect to this application. So grateful to everybody for engaging with us on that. However, we do feel that there are still some issues which remain, which we would like to discuss tonight, which is why I'm here. So although the residents are generally supportive of the school initiative, we do feel that the planned school size, 400 plus pupils, is ambitious, just given the size of the site available. And therefore, we think further careful consideration should be given to the use of the site, as there are some practical considerations which we feel have not yet been fully thought out. So although a grammar school was in place on the same site in the past, it had much more space available to it. Space which is now used by Harrow College, which is a separate educational facility on the same site. Now, the current application results in the reduction of available parking spaces from 50 to 17 spaces, plus the addition of a mugger. Now, we are supportive of the fact under the current proposal, the mugger has now been moved further away from the residence boundary. So grateful again to Nicola, etc. for that consideration. However, we are still concerned that the current scheme proposed does not account for the safe drop-off, pick-up of pupils or avoid additional traffic congestion on Brooks Hill, which is already quite a congested thoroughfare. Potentially, the school should be considering using the space available to it as a drop-off zone or traffic management area, as opposed to creating a mugger or other play areas, actually. The school's current plan for a drop-off pickup is that parents park at Lidl in Harrow Weald, which is approximately, depending on how fast you walk, a 15-minute walk away with primary school children up a hill. Now, we feel, I mean, I have a 3-year-old, so I've done this walk. We feel that the current plan is unrealistic and is actually likely to result in illegal parking, congestion, safety issues, and inconvenience for residents, given that their driveways may be blocked by parents dropping off. So we've brought this topic up with the school stakeholders multiple times with the request that they consider this plan further. To avoid illegal parking congestion on Brooks Hill, we would recommend additional traffic control measures, such as yellow lines, other enforcement measures, so for instance, cameras. Brooks Hill is a single lane A road and a main conduit between Bushy and Harrow. There is already another school further up the road, Avanti House, which already has increased the car volume on the road. We feel it should be noted that cars would not be able to park on Brooks Hill without actually blocking the road, which we feel would have significant impact in the morning rush hour. Now, if this application had been a sort of a full planning application, then we believe that travel plans, traffic surveys would have been part of that application, and residents would not actually have had to fight so hard to get these traffic safety and parking considerations fully considered. We would be very much in favour of a condition being applied to this application that this aspect is fully considered before the school can occupy the building. I think, yeah, as I think Nicola mentioned, highways have been involved in the consideration here. We'd also like to understand the school's plan B, you know, if the existing plan doesn't work out. I mean, I suppose in conclusion, I suppose I'm coming to the end of my 3 minutes, but in conclusion, we don't think this is actually a minor alteration by virtue of the fact or the potential impact on traffic safety and parking considerations on Brooks Hill. And that's why I'm here tonight, just to voice those concerns. Generally, all the residents on this road are of the same view.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much for your time and the opportunity.
Okay. Is David Ball on the line, head teacher?
Yes.
Good. If you'd like to address us for 3 minutes.
So my name's David Poole. I'm the head teacher of the Hood Primary. Thank you very much for the kind words that the residents have said. We set up voluntary meetings with residents and they've been very productive. I can confirm that when I was first appointed in November, the first thing I did was to ensure that there were sufficient parking spaces within a mile of the site, as the whole of Brooks Hill, all the way up to Avanti, has yellow lines, so it is illegal to park anywhere along it, and in fact is dangerous if you were to do so. And as the planning officer said, there's been increased stuff with traffic enforcement. I can also confirm that I've already spoken to the Lidl head office, who confirmed that we can use their car park for drop-off. You'll also be aware that the DFE has a commitment to encourage children to do a mile walk every day at least, and that is quite usefully about the distance that they'll do from Lidl to the school and back. The mugger has been moved. It's really important that a primary school has a sports area, a play area, which they can use during the day and to some extent for a short time after school. And the mugger is actually probably the minimum that we need in terms of running sports facilities and so on. You'll be aware that the grammar school had 600 children on it. Even when we're at maximum, we're at 420. So we are a smaller site. We're using the land in front of the building and the land in the middle of the building as play areas, as well as the mugger as well. So we know that this is a fantastic opportunity for a new free school within Harrow, particularly for Muslim values, Islamic values, to be impressed and to allow children who want to come. We have 60 signed up and they're very enthusiastic, as are their parents, and we hope that you'll accept this minor works application, which is actually to do with louvers, to do with doors, the covering and the mugger. It has nothing to do with traffic and will not impact on traffic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is Stephen Greek on the line?
Yes, Chairman, I'm here. Can you hear me?
As you know, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. I'm here tonight to raise a couple of important outstanding issues that need to be dealt with as a result of this proposal, and which can and should be addressed as part of this application. I would like to make clear that I'm not here to oppose the school itself, and in any case, the use of the site has already been established. On the contrary, I want to see the school succeed and to start off on the best possible footing. But like all school developments, it's important to get the detail right. For the past 3 months, residents and myself, as you've heard, have had regular meetings with the school to try to constructively deal with various local impacts. And to everyone's credit, including the schools, this has led to some very positive changes, such as the new layout of the mugger that's now in front of us. However, a significant outstanding concern is traffic and highway safety. And it's actually worth noting on pages 223 and 224 of the agenda, the substantial concerns that highways officers have actually raised. Unfortunately, this issue is in danger of being completely overlooked because of an excessively narrow view of what is considered, what can be considered as part of this application. I understand that change of use is not part of this application. I think everyone does by now. However, it is also the case that parking on the site is being dramatically reduced as a result of this application from 50 spaces down to 17. That makes a real difference because otherwise options such as drop-off areas could have been considered. So that should give sufficient grounds for at least some consideration of the traffic impacts of the scheme, and it is an opportunity we can't afford to miss. Parking enforcement on Brooks Hill is a major consideration. There is nowhere safe to park on this road, and experience suggests that at least some school parents will try to park as close as they can, whatever arrangements are in place, and you can't just rely on everyone following the rules voluntarily. Whilst the lower part of the road is covered by either single or double yellow lines, this is not the case for the top part of the road, where actually the majority of residents live. We should be putting yellow lines along the whole road. The zigzag lines outside the college need to be extended to cover all the school entrances and need to be made enforceable. And in the circumstances, we should be considering parking enforcement cameras. In terms of parent parking, whilst the informal arrangement with Lidl is welcome, it remains to be seen how well this will work in practice. I understand the arrangement can't be formalised, so relies on Lidl's continuing goodwill. It is also half a mile's walk from the school, including a steep hill. So we really need some idea of contingency plans and perhaps a firm consideration of minibuses. So what we really need is a condition that requires proposals for traffic enforcement measures, contingency parking plans and a formalised travel plan to minimise car usage where possible. Another issue is weekend use of the school site. Whilst the hours restrictions on the mugger are welcome, there are serious concerns about weekend lettings on the rest of the site, for example, the school hall, especially in view of the traffic issues already outlined. Given that this application is designed to make the whole site viable as a school, again, I think it would be appropriate to include a condition restricting weekend external use across the whole site. Applications like this can often be a good opportunity to address these types of issues and close existing loopholes, and so that should be the case here. Thank you for your time. I hope you'll consider favourably my comments, the comments of local residents and the specific concerns that have been raised. And I also trust that my contribution will be taken in the constructive spirit that it's intended. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Nice to see you again.
And yourself.
After a long time. Would any officers like to comment on what's being said by the objectors or the applicant, or in fact, Councillor Greek, particularly relating to traffic and hours of use?
Chair, if I can come in on the hours of use of the school, I do appreciate the comments that Councillor Greek has made. Unfortunately, it would be well outside the remit of this planning application to attach a condition on the wider use of the site, which is a lawful use. Indeed, they could use it for the hours that they want, including weekends, I'm afraid, and it would go beyond the test relevant for conditions for us to attach such a condition. In relation to the traffic impacts, I'd actually be grateful for the advice of a colleague. If you would bear with me while Councillor Ramchani speaks, and I will come back to you on that particular question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Kieran.
Thank you. It's actually on the issue of the traffic. I would really like to support this application, but can we ask for a full travel plan as a condition of the application? Is that possible?
Okay. Kasantha? Kasantha, you're still on mute.
Sorry about that. It's a tip of finger. Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's a refurbishment of the building, which improved the outlook of this building with the glazed doors and boundaries and everything. And the main objection, the issues is the traffic. I think with the COVID-19, everybody is going to be encouraged either to walk, and it's good health for the children to walk a mile and a half. And the traffic and parking issues can be resolved with the school and the parents' consultations. And I'm sure it can be managed, and it's being managed by all other schools in Harrow. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Okay, Sachin.
Thank you, Chair. Traffic is an issue that always comes up on most applications, but particularly when we look at school applications, it's the perennial issue, and unfortunately, it is there is some traffic consequences of a school application, but outweighed that is you get a new school, and I've always thought that the benefits to the community of a new school, especially in this case a Muslim school that will serve a large community, is important. I think the issue of the Lidl car park is a bit worrying. It is quite a steep hill. I know as a former pupil of the Harrow Weald campus of Harrow College, I know the site very well, and I've had to walk up that hill once when a bus threw me off early when I was going to college, and found it very difficult when I was 16 to walk up that hill. I still do, and I suspect primary schools and parents with buggies and these would find that difficult as well. So I'm not entirely convinced that Lidl is the best option, but I don't think that's sufficient to refuse the application. Something around the travel plan would be good.
Marilyn.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Chairman, first of all, I'd like to say, as has been said, that this is in fact a delightful evening. We don't often have things that come to the planning committee that are such good news for Harrow, and this is really very good news. And I really am very happy to be on the committee when this application has come before us. Now, as Beverly has said, Beverly Kuchar, who is the interim divisional director, the issue for us, whether we want to accept this or not, it is a fact, is that we can't unpick the permission that was given for this to become a D1 educational campus. We have to accept the fact that the main school building, the only control we have over it, for want of a better way of describing it, is by reason of the building works that have been done to it. And a tremendous effort, and I'd like to compliment Nicola Rankin actually on her work on this, because a tremendous effort has been put in on the biodiversity, on the heritage, on the green belt, all the things that are germane to this application. The one thing we haven't got jurisdiction over is the use of the main building. That is permission that was granted a long time ago, is part of the fabric, as it were, for want of a better word, of what it is that this campus offers, and that is an educational facility. Whether it's a school or a college or a high school is immaterial. So what we're looking at is only insofar as the mother is concerned, which is the thing that over which we do have control and say as to the hours of use and who uses it. And that is clearly set out in the report. If you look on the addendum, it makes it crystal clear that there is an informative that we expect a lot of effort to go in to work with the new little in Harrow-Weald. They have a huge car park there. It is a bit of a distance, and I agree with Councillor Shah that it is actually quite a long walk, and it wouldn't be that much fun in the winter, but equally needs must. And also on the addendum, unless I've misread it, Chair, I can see that there is quite a lot of detail about how we would come to enforce any injudicious parking to the front of the college. I do agree with Councillor Greek that it would be an idea perhaps to restrict parking further up where people live, so that in actual fact Brooks Hill would be out of bounds for people dropping off their children at the school, because it isn't appropriate for people to pull up on the curb at the best of times, as you know, and certainly under these circumstances it would be quite dangerous. It's a very busy road, so I think we do have to consider making as much effort as possible to make this as safe as possible, not least for the children and parents who will be attending this school. But in the round, Chairman, I am very happy about this. I think it's a wonderful achievement, and I do hope that the school will go from strength to strength. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Christopher.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that I too welcome this. I think, you know, what's to dislike really? Improved facilities at an educational campus, but I share some of the points that Councillor Greek made were legitimate, and I share in particular the concern about the informality of that arrangement with little, you know, we wouldn't want that to be the kind of thing where in a couple of months' time they turn around and say, well, actually it's inconvenient for large numbers of parents to be dropping off people in our car park twice a day, and turn around and withdraw that. So my concerns were mainly around that, but in general I welcome this. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. And Jana. You've put yourself on mute.
Thank you, Chair. I actually very welcome this application, and I welcome the school. And I would just say that apart from all the concerns that has been flagged by everyone here, obviously need to give some attention to that. But I really wish school very well in their future endeavours, and I really welcome this school in this borough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe Beverly wanted to say something.
Yes, Chair, thank you. I just had the chance to review any potential conditions. I think in the light of the fact that the site currently has some parking available, and in the light of the fact that the school really does need the Mcgrath for the to meet educational use, and that does result in the loss of some parking, I think it would be reasonable to attach a condition requiring the submission of a travel plan. I think that's as far as we can go. We'll talk to Highways about liaising with the school on that. So if members are happy to delegate the wording of the condition to me, we will require the submission of a travel plan in accordance to what we've done on other sites. It is it's not a straightforward issue because it's not connected to the school as a whole, but I think given what the site currently enjoys and what's the outcome of this application, I think we would be entitled to attach that condition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I think we can move to the vote, therefore. I have heard the whole of the discussion. I agree with the condition for a travel plan and I vote to grant the application. Councillor
Visanfali, I have heard all the discussion and subject to the condition, I vote to grant.
Good. Sachin?
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard the discussion and I vote to grant.
Kieran?
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani, I've heard the whole of the discussion and subject to the condition, I vote to grant the application.
Marilyn? I can't hear you, Marilyn.
I didn't unmute properly, sorry, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and subject to the grant to the condition to have a travel plan, I vote to grant. Thank you.
Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all of the discussion and subject to that condition, I vote to grant.
And Anjana?
Councillor Ranjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and subject to the condition regarding the travel plan, I vote to grant.
Good. So that's granted and that is unanimous. I now propose that we have a short break, a short comfort break, and if we can resume somewhere around about 7:45. Don't turn your stuff off, just go and make yourself a cup of tea or whatever. Got an echo. I've had a discussion with Democratic Services during the break. Currently, with our technology, we can replay Councillor Stevenson's contribution, and then Christopher should be able to confirm that he's heard the whole of the discussion, and we can therefore retake the vote. I'm not sure if the IT is going to work quite as well as I'm told it will, but if Andre can replay Councillor Stevenson's contribution.
Councillor Ferry, if you can adjourn the meeting so I can get Christopher back to the recording, and we'll then come back once he's reviewed the footage.
Okay, then we'll just wait until you've done that.
Thank you, Chair.
That should take about 5 minutes or so, shouldn't it? Okay.
You're live.
All right, Christopher, are you satisfied that you've heard the whole of the discussion?
Yes, Chair, I'm satisfied that I've heard all the discussion.
Right, and we're talking about item 202, Suncourt Mayfield Drive. Therefore, we've confirmed that everybody on the committee has heard the discussion. We have a motion for refusal, so I'll vote first. I vote to oppose the motion for refusal. Cassandra.
Thank you, Chair. I as did my vote first, I vote to refuse.
Okay. Sachin.
Thank you, Chair. As in my last vote, I vote against the motion to refusal, so I vote in favour of the application.
Kieran.
As previously, I vote against the motion to refuse and I vote in favour of the application.
Marilyn.
I vote for the motion to refuse, Chairman.
Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I vote for the motion to refuse.
And Jana.
I vote for the motion to be refused.
Right, so by my calculation is that there are 4 votes to refuse the application and 3 votes to grant the application, so the application is refused. Right, if we can go back to item 209, which is the land fronting Uxbridge Road. And whoever's presenting, if you can be very brief.
Thank you, Chair. Can you and members just confirm that you can see the presentation?
We can, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, can I interject? Can you hear me?
Who's that?
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman? Brian Stoker. Can you hear me?
We haven't called you yet.
No, I'm asking the chairman, have you not excused yourself? At the original application, you excused yourself from the meeting because you're the portfolio holder for planning.
That's
this
right.
is a part of the same application. These are the conditions applied by that meeting.
That's right.
Why have you not excused yourself?
I've declared a non-pecuniary interest.
There we
which
have.
you'll see from the note on the website.
No, you haven't for this one. You have for the other Bannister one.
Well, the other Bannister one was a substantial approval, and I felt as then I had a pecuniary interest being the portfolio holder for property. I don't believe that I have a pecuniary interest in just changing the conditions.
But the conditions came about from a meeting that you excused yourself
me,
from because you had an interest.
You'll have your time in a minute. I'd like to have the presentation done first.
Thank you, Chair. So this is agenda item 209. By way of addendum, one further objection was received on the 15th of July in regard to additional information supplied by the applicant for condition 15. There has been an update to relevant policies subsections within the report, and there's an additional appraisal and clarification on the details pursuant to condition 15, which is materials. Just to remind members, the application site relates to a parcel of land approximately 0.5 hectares in size, which fronts Uxbridge Road and is adjacent to the Bannister Sports Centre to its eastern and northern boundaries. Members will be aware that planning permission was granted for an adventure golf leisure facility on the site, and that was granted on the 23rd of September 2019 with a completed Section 106 agreement and subject to conditions. So the application before members is the approval of details condition to discharge 9 of the conditions which were attached to the planning permission, and these have been detailed extensively in the officer report. This slide here just shows the indicative layout of the car parking which serves the facility, and also the actual mini golf layout. As part of the condition 15 relates to materials, and the applicant has provided appropriate information on the dinosaur prop specifications, external finishes and materials. So the respective details which have been submitted were comprehensively reviewed by the Council's Highways, Drainage, Environmental Health, Landscape, Arboriculture and Biodiversity officers, who in their professional judgment and in accordance with their statutory duties and requirements have confirmed that the details submitted would be acceptable to address why the conditions were imposed in the first instance. On this basis, officers consider that the submitted details would ensure that the development would be enhanced while mitigating against any adverse effects in line with the relevant considerations addressed within the original planning application. Accordingly, officers conclude that the respective conditions can be discharged, and members are kindly requested to agree with the officer recommendation and to approve the details submitted. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions? I would point out that this has been called in by a nominated member and would normally be dealt with under delegated powers. That's why I feel that I can take part in the discussion. I don't see any questions, so Mr. Stoker, would you like to address us for 3 minutes?
Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
I can.
This is a contentious site, a field owned by the council in the Greenbelt guardianship of the council, used as an overflow car park for the Bannister Centre on major event days. This dinosaur golf application is for fulfilment of some of the many conditions placed by the council because there's no design in the original application. My comment about the approval at the time was it's planning by condition, not my design. So we would expect here to find, nearly 2 years later, a proper design definition of what is planned to be built, with proper evidence to support discharge of the conditions, but this is not the case. Not only is it inadequate and wrong evidence put forward, but the officer's report to you is incorrect in many significant places and clearly has not been properly checked before issued to you. Website states application is already approved on the 4th of February. For example, the report states the site is located just northwest of the roundabout when it's actually northeast and is a space between the Bannister Sports Ground and the main Uxbridge Road, contrary to the document title being part of the Roger Bannister. Location is actually important. The consultee comments do not answer my detailed objection sent 10th of Jan, 28th of May, 17th of July. They're all generally ignored. Addressing some of the conditions, 9, surface water drainage. As pointed out at the original application, the drainage report has a completely wrong understanding of the site, which is subject to flooding and does not, quote, drain off the east and under a railway line, but actually to the west, and the railway line is 1 kilometre away to the west. 10, sewage disposal. The condition requires development, quote, not commenced until works for the disposal of sewage have been provided on the site. This cannot be fulfilled because no sewage works have been constructed on the site. It's a catch-22 condition and cannot be discharged. In addition, drawings showing foul drains are, quote, indicative and, quote, potential and not connected to any outlet, so no design exists. The alien to the environment dinosaurs are significant. After 2 years of asking about safe fixing foundations for 1.4 tonne, 7 metres high by 60 metres long dinosaur and 3 others, we now have a part statement in the officer report about reinforced concrete slabs, but this is nowhere in the applicant's documents, so where is it defined? What about design materials, flammable, carcinogenic, lead, cadmium, etc.? Even the colour is unknown. It could be green belt fluorescent yellow or black and white polka dot. So are not submitted full details of materials. 12, landscaping. There are 7 trees and numerous shrubs actually planted exactly along 36 metres of the gas pipeline prohibited keep-out zone, unacceptable. The planning committee has refused applications for poor design in the past. Here we have no design. You must therefore reject this nonsense application. If you approve it without conditions again, you are approving an unknown design with flawed evidence to the detriment of the community. We'd like this representation to be recorded in the printed minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stoker. I have been sent the speech by Pierre Downset for the applicant, so I'll read that out. The application before you seeks to discharge planning conditions. The application has already been given planning permission by this committee in September 2019. Therefore, the principle of the development has already been considered. Over the course of the last 6 months, we have had meetings with the officers and provided additional detail and clarification where it has been required. We have had discussion with service providers, including the gas and water companies, and have met the gas company on site to ensure we are absolutely aware of the mains gas services are. We appreciate that this type of development is an unusual form of development, but it is also an exciting one. We have found that the adventure experience courses elsewhere have brought families together and provided a fun leisure and recreation activity that otherwise was not available. These conditions are the final pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that will allow the development to go ahead.
So jigsaw puzzle.
In the hope that just remain silent, please. These conditions are the final pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that will allow the development to go ahead, in the hope that when we all move away from the current COVID pandemic, people seek opportunities to be outside and engage in sport and leisure activities. But fundamental to that is having the right types of services and activities for those people to undertake.
The right to dinosaurs.
As your officers have pointed out, each one of the professional consultees are satisfied that the details we have supplied are sufficient to discharge in conditions. As I have already said, we have worked extensively with officers to ensure that the right level of information has been provided, and we would now ask councillors to support your officers' recommendations and discharge these pre-commencement conditions. Stephen, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And thank you for the opportunity to address you again. When we considered this application 2 years ago, a large number of important issues were put out to condition. For example, when we queried the impact and design of the proposed dinosaurs, we were told this would all be fine because a condition would ensure this was dealt with. Well, here we are with the condition in front of us, and it is not fine at all. This is greenbelt land and an area of special character, and these designs, from what we've seen so far, will stick out like a sore thumb and harm the openness of the area that the council has been entrusted to protect. They also pose a potential danger to highway safety at a busy location that is already prone to accidents, and where the council is now planning a new cycle lane. Just a momentary distraction from the appearance and noise of these dinosaurs could be catastrophic. I would also like to say something about the construction process, which is another of the conditions. Residents locally have had a terrible experience with construction noise from the new sports pitches site at Bannister, and are very concerned that similar could happen here. We need to make absolutely sure that there is strict adherence to construction hours. At the Bannister pitches, noisy work has often started as early as 7 AM. I note that whilst the COVID rules allow extensions to construction hours, these are very much at the discretion of the local authority, and so in this case we must ensure there is no extension. We also need to ensure that noisy work is kept to an absolute minimum, and that as far as possible residents are informed of noisy work in advance. And unnecessary deliveries should be discouraged, for example by avoiding equipment being continually removed and then redelivered. So for reasons of greenbelt openness, residential amenity and highway safety, I would urge you to refuse tonight's applications so that plans can be sent back to the drawing board and hopefully come back in a better condition. I'd also just like to say that I was at the planning meeting 2 years ago when this was considered. I do recall Councillor Ferry leaving the room for reasons of it being council land. I think it does still remain council land. Obviously, it's up to Councillor Ferry what he chooses to do in this situation, but I thought I'd make that point. Many thanks.
Many thanks, Stephen. Do any of the officers wish to reply to any of the points that have been raised so far? No. Nabil. I've got a picture of Nabil up here. Do you wish to respond? No. Okay. Marilyn.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. As you so rightly observed, obviously this wouldn't have been you, I called this in to the committee because I too was concerned that, frankly, given the way that this has all been handled thus far, the details wouldn't be properly dealt with. The conditions wouldn't be, the pre-commencement conditions wouldn't be discharged correctly, and lo and behold, they're not being discharged correctly. And that is a real problem, because pre-commencement conditions are very important, particularly when you do have what they would commonly call reserved matters, when things are not finished and done and dusted. And the devil is always in the detail with these things. I mean, really, I believe that it is very important that we make sure that we do make an effort to screen off these dinosaurs. Honestly, it's so ridiculous. In the green belt, in an area of special character, of course, from the roadway and also from the long view. And at our briefing, we were told that the landscaping would include plane trees. Plane trees are deciduous, and in the winter they lose their leaves, and they will do nothing for a large part of the year in this sort of climate to screen off these ghastly, huge 25-foot high dinosaur things. And quite frankly, I think Councillor Greek made a very good point. You're driving along the road and all of a sudden there's this whacking great big diplodocus or something glaring at you. And yes, in the winter we can have nice weather. So I do think that it's important that we do some planting, and I'd like that condition to be beefed up a bit in respect of the type of species that we use. And I hope the officers will take that on board, if I may. Also, Councillor Greek alluded to this, the code of practice has not been followed in a very neighbour-friendly way. I have received, and this is not in my ward, a number of complaints from local residents, particularly those who are living in Birch Park, whose life has become a complete misery because of what, frankly, Chairman, in your infinite wisdom, you as the portfolio holder have orchestrated here. And I would urge the council to make sure that environmental health take a very great interest in the hours of work, and that the contracted code of practice is adhered to the letter, because you know, it is people move into an area which abuts the green belt. They don't expect to be surrounded by noisy construction vehicles for months and months on end, and also by neighbouring dinosaurs. I mean, it's not Jurassic Park. This is Bannister playing fields. So I would urge everybody to take that on board. But as I said, Chairman, I'm not happy with this. I really am not. And I do think that there are issues that have not been finalised, which is the whole purpose of having these pre-commencement conditions. And I'm going to be proposing refusal on them. And as follows, the proposed materials used for the construction of the model dinosaurs is out of keeping in a green belt setting and in an area of special character, and would be visually obtrusive in the street scene, and to the detriment of the long views from both the road and when viewed from the green belt itself, and would therefore result in a loss of amenity within the locality. Contrary, Harrow Core Strategy, CS1B and CS1F 2012, National Planning Policy Framework 2019, Policy 7.16B of the London Plan 2016, and Policy G2 of the draft London plan, and policy DM1 and DM16 of the Harrow Development Management Policies Local Plan 2013. Thank you, Chairman.
Christopher.
So thank you, Chair. I share Councillor Ashton's concerns that not enough is being done to obscure the view of the dinosaurs from the road. I think it does, even if it's just one driver, as Councillor Ashton has said, being distracted by this. I think that's a major concern, and I would like to second her motion for refusal.
Okay. Sachin.
On this application, it is very unusual for discharge of duties, discharge of conditions to be to come to committee, and that's because there are two halves to a planning process. There's planning committee members, councillors who are not planning professionals, and there's a part that is very important that planning professionals deal with, and the discharge of conditions is a very important part of that. So I fully back the officers. I think they're the experts in this area, and they are recommending we support it, and I will be supporting the application.
Okay, thank you. I make it very clear that even though we passed the original application, and we are now faced with looking at the conditions, there is no predetermination whatsoever that we should accept these conditions just because the previous application was passed by the committee. So have you got a seconder, Marilyn?
Yes, already Chris seconded it.
Chris has seconded it.
Yes, I'll second it.
Okay. So we have a motion for refusing the application. I'll go first, and I vote against refusal of the application to refuse, having heard all of the discussion.
Councillor Ghazanfali, I heard all the discussion and I vote against the motion to refuse.
Sachin.
Councillor Sachin Shah, having heard all the discussion, I vote against the motion to refuse.
Kieran.
Councillor Kieran Ramsey, having heard the whole of the discussion, I vote against the motion.
Marilyn.
Having heard all the discussion, I vote for the motion to refuse.
Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, having heard all of the discussion, I vote to refuse.
Anjana.
Anjana Patel, having heard all the discussion, I vote to refuse the application.
Okay, so there are 4 votes against the application and 3 votes for, so the application fails. On the recommendation to approve the reasons for approval as set out in the report and to approve the details, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to agree with the officer's recommendations and grant permission. So,
Councillor Ghazanfali, I heard all the discussion and proceedings and I vote to grant the application. Thank you.
Sachin.
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
And Kieran.
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani, I have heard the whole of the discussion and I vote to grant permission.
Marilyn.
Having heard all the discussion, I vote to refuse the recommendation.
Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I vote to refuse.
And Anjana.
Councillor Anjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse the application.
So I make that 4 votes to approve the application and 3 votes against, so the application is approved. And we can move on to item 210, which is Hermitage Gate, Clamp Hill.
Good evening, Chair. I am Bettina Neke. I'm presenting Hermitage Gate. I hope you can see. Can you see my presentations? Are you able to see the?
Yes, we can.
This application is in relation to it's a household application to extend a dwelling house in the green belt, and also to provide a replacement boundary treatment, and also a carport and various other developments. The application building trying to share my that is the application site. And this is the area view of the property, and this is the property in question. There is a proposed two-story side extension, and it is in this green section, this area. And then the other part of the development is this boundary treatment. And then there is also a proposal for the carport. I'm only referring to this. There are other elements of the proposal, but those are not contentious. The proposal as it stands is recommended for refusal because the site is in a green belt, and the application has been considered in terms of character of the area, in terms of amenity impact, in terms of the green belt issues. And in terms of the character and appearance of the area, the application is considered acceptable. In terms of amenity impact, there are no immediate neighbors, so the application is acceptable. However, in terms of greenbelt issues, the application is considered unacceptable. The proposal, as you can see in paragraph 6.2.3 of the report, shows that the proposed two-story side extension would result in a 99% increase in the footprint of the original dwelling house. And I can also please refer to the addendum, because we have updated the table to also show the difference between the existing and the original dwelling, and also in terms of the proposal and the original dwelling. And as I was saying, the proposed two-story side extension would result in 99% increase in the footprint of the dwelling, and would result in 141% increase in the floor space of the original dwelling, and 98% increase in the volume of the original dwelling. Generally, in Harrow Council, we accept about around 30% increase in terms of footprint, volume, and floor space increases over original size of the dwelling properties. So in this particular case, the extensions will result in disproportionate extensions to the house, and it is considered to be inappropriate development in the greenbelt because of those excessive increases over and above the original dwelling. In relation to the boundary treatment, it is considered to be inappropriate development because the NPPF, which is the National Planning Policy Framework, specifically excludes gates and fences from being excludes them as appropriate development in the green belt. They are considered to be inappropriate by the policy, by the national policy. And it's also they're considered to be inappropriate development as well by London Plan and our own local policies. Therefore, the boundary treatment is refused in principle because they are inappropriate development in the green belt. I will, however, point out that there are fallback positions which the applicant can use in terms of permitted development rights. The applicant can construct up to 2 meters high boundary fence at the site, at the size of the property, provided they do not front onto a highway, or at the back, provided they do not back onto a highway as well. But in terms of any elevation that fronts onto a highway, in this particular case, the front elevation, they can only go up to 1 meter using their permitted development right, or they can go as high as the existing fence in the site without planning permission. So they might have to, they can consider using their permitted development right to provide acceptable boundary treatment to the site. In terms of the carport, if as covered in paragraph 6.2.10 to 6.2.12, it's also considered to be an inappropriate development in the greenbelt for the same reason. The government also excludes carports as appropriate development in the greenbelt, so this is also not acceptable. So in conclusion, the scheme is being refused on greenbelt policies simply because there are inappropriate developments and they are refused in principle. Thank you. I will take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions to the officer? Sachin.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a question around the increase. So normally in applications, we're told we have to look at the increase compared to what is already there, whereas in this presentation we talk about increase compared to the original application. Can you just explain why often we're told what is there, and therefore we're looking at how the application changes compared to what's there? So can you talk about why that's different this time?
Thank you, Chair. There are different. If I do not have paragraph 89 of our PPF handy, but in the NPPF there are different categories. In terms of extension of dwelling houses, you are meant to compare the extension in terms of the original property as against the proposed extension. So in relation to extensions of property, you take the original size into consideration. If in terms of redevelopment of dwelling houses, you take the existing sizes into consideration. That is what NPPF requires us to do. Is that clear?
So I think what you're saying is if this application was for a complete knockdown and rebuild, it would be based on what is already there. But as it's an extension, it's based on the original building. Yes,
it will be based on what is already there. But even at that, we will still consider what would normally be acceptable would be about 30% increase on what is there, or 30% increase on the original dwelling in any of the two assessments.
Okay, thank you very much. Beverly, I think you wanted to say something?
Yes, so it's paragraph 145, subparagraph C, of the NPPF, which says the extension or alteration of a building, provided that it does not result in disproportionate additions over and above the size of the original building, or to clarify the building as it was on the 1st of July 1948, which is the relevant. It's different in Greenbelt policy than it is for assessing extensions elsewhere. I take your concern that if we're looking at extension outside the Greenbelt, we look at what's there and how it impacts. Within the Greenbelt, we look at the original property and how much the cumulative effect has increased. It's a different test. It's not an amenity test. It's a test of impact on the openness of the Greenbelt. But it's based on that policy within the NPPF. I hope that clarifies.
It does. I won't repeat my views on the Greenbelt, but I think this sums it up.
Are there any other questions? I can't see any, so could I ask Mr. Birtles if he's on the line to address us? There he is. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Birtles.
Can you hear me?
We can, yes.
Good evening, members. My name is Roger Birtles and I represent the applicant who owns Hermitage Gate. The proposals before you tonight are all about restoring this property to its former glory after some years of neglect, including recent occupation by squatters. If permitted, the property will come back into use as the family home of the applicant. Hermitage Gate is locally listed. The works we are proposing have been prepared in consultation with the conservation officer, and she recognises our proposal will deliver significant heritage benefits. She is supporting the application. Other than the planning officers, no one else is objecting to the application. No residents have objected, nor is the Harrow Heritage Society. Equally, your trees officer is satisfied and there is no flood risk issue. It is only your planning officers that are against the proposal, and their principal reason is one of theoretical greenbelt policy. They consider that the proposed extension, when taken with other historic extensions to the property, would result in a building that is disproportionate compared to the 1948 house. We do not agree with your officers about their estimate of the size of the 1948 house. We believe, based on the OS plans, that it was significantly larger, and therein our percentage increased much less. We say just over 50%. But in any event, our extension is small. It is 40 square metres, which is a 9% increase on the existing house. It is not an additional 99 square metres, as the addendum report presented to you tonight suggests. That is simply wrong. The extension is confined to the side and elevation of the building, which is not original, and adopts an architectural style in keeping with the main house. It will enhance this elevation. Your officers accept that the proposed extension would not impact on the openness of the green belt, given its size and location. We're also proposing to remove existing buildings on the site, so that overall there will be a net reduction in built development. We'll remove the garage, the tennis court, the storage building, and the former swimming pool. In total, there'll be a 21% reduction in built development, with a corresponding increase in landscaping. That must be to the benefit of the green belt. You have heard your officers are also taking objection to the carport and the boundary wall. The carport replaces the existing garage. Its lightweight open structure means that it will have a lesser impact on the green belt than the current garage. If necessary, though, we could relocate the carport to an alternative part of the site, or indeed omit it if required. In respect to the boundary wall, all we're proposing is to replace the existing damaged boundary wall with a new wall of the same height. Members, we've listened to your officers long in coming forward with this application. We have greatly reduced the scale of the proposed extension to what you now see before you. Allowing tonight's application will bring about the restoration of this important heritage asset, and as importantly, bring back into use the property as a family home. There will be no discernible impact on the green belt, and consequently, members, I ask you to support this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Birtles. Are there any comments from members of the committee? Marilyn.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. As you know, I took the decision to call this in. Now, look, I understand, as you know, Chairman, very well about the green belt policies. I live in the green belt. It's wonderful living in the green belt. And we all understand that there is a presumption against development in the green belt. And I'm sure that the architect and owner of this heritage property understand it very well. The problem is that, and this is where I do struggle with it, and I'm pleased that Councillor Shah, I don't quite share his views on the green belt, I have to add, but I kind of do struggle with it. I mean, when you actually think about this, we've got these whacking great big skyscrapers going up everywhere, obscuring the primacy of St Mary's Spire and Harrow on the Hill, which is one of the most wonderful heritage sites abutting metropolitan open land. We've got plasticky looking tacky dinosaurs looming large at 21 foot high in the green belt, an area of special character. And then we've come across a really beautifully designed development like this in the green belt, but because of the way that the council officers have chosen to calculate the matrix, I frankly am struggling to understand how they've arrived at their calculation, but there you go, I give them the benefit of the doubt. The problem is we end up with the applicant having tried for years to get planning permission on this site to bring back this building into its former glory, has ended up empty-handed again. And it's very difficult because it's recommended for refusal and we are not allowed to grant a refusal. It doesn't work that way. We can say that were this to come back, having been re-notified, we might be minded to grant it. That we can do. Or we could vote to defer determination to give the officers and the applicant an opportunity, rather than refuse it tonight, to sit down and perhaps come to some kind of compromise. I mean, I would favour that personally. I think there is still scope to make this work. But I think that the officers, and I say this very respectfully, in this particular case, because it's each on its own merits, I think the officers are going to have to also compromise. I don't see how harmful this particular development is in the green belt. I think it's tasteful, and I'm actually quite upset about it. I wouldn't normally call something in like this, but I'm very, very concerned that we are sticking to our guns come hell or high water. And meanwhile, we've got this derelict building that's had squatters in it, and it's locally listed, and frankly, it does nothing to make the green belt look nice or any character issue. So I'd like to propose, and we'll have to put this to the vote, that we defer determining this application tonight, rather than refuse it, and give the applicant a chance to sit down again with the officers and perhaps work out an accommodation, so that you know, maybe there can be some wiggle room under the circumstances. I don't think we can exactly argue very special circumstances, which is a technical term in green belt policy, but it's got to a point now when it's getting actually a little silly, the kind of things that we're granting, and then this comes along, a tasteful, beautiful development, and we just refuse to do anything less. I'm very disappointed, actually. So I'd like to propose that we defer and give the officers another chance, and the architects and owners of this lovely property an opportunity to perhaps meet each other halfway.
Sachin.
Thank you, Chair. I will support Marilyn's motion. However, I want to propose my own motion that goes slightly further, because we can propose that we are minded to grant, and then this would come back at another committee. Officers would do whatever they need to do with pre-commencement conditions. So I would like to propose a motion that the committee is minded to grant the application, and then officers can do what they need to do. If that motion fails, I think then I would support Marilyn's motion to defer, but I wonder if we do it in that order, in order to allow us to either mind grant or then defer.
I'm happy with that, Sachin.
Anjana.
I'll be happy to support Sachin's motion. Otherwise,
Okay.
I was going to second Marilyn's motion.
Okay, Marilyn, which one would you prefer? We can't do both.
Of course not. Well, I think Sachin is enlightened. And,
yeah.
I think the enthusiasm for what you normally say would have to stop there, Sachin. But I'm very happy to second your motion.
We can now build on the whole of the green belt next. So we'll start with this.
Okay, Kasantha.
I'm quite happy to do that.
Thank you, Chair. Just my comments. I think this building having been derelict and being occupied as squatters, I think it'd be improvement to the locality, and also it's improved the green belt. So I really support the motion Councillor Sachin Shah has proposed. Thank you.
Okay, well, as I understand it, we have a motion that we are minded to grant this. We can't do it this evening. It has to come back to another meeting. But on the motion that we are minded to grant, if that's the right expression, I'll vote first. I've heard the whole of the discussion and I am minded to grant. Kasantha.
Yes, Councillor Kasantha Ali, I've heard all the discussion and I'm minded to grant the motion.
Sachin.
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussion. I'm minded to grant the application.
Kieran.
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani, I've heard the whole of the discussion and I'm minded to grant.
Marilyn.
I've heard all the discussion and I'm minded to grant.
Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I am minded to grant.
Anjana.
Councillor Ranjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I'm minded to grant the application.
So we're all unanimous in that, and the decision is that we're minded to grant, so that will come back to another committee at some future date. We move on to 102 Prince Edward Playing Fields. I think Nicola's going to present this. I just have to disappear for 30 seconds because I'm sitting in the dark. All right, I'm back.
Thank you, Chair. I think there was a slight technical issue on the previous presentation, so hopefully now that's moving through the slides, if you can see that.
Yes, we can see that.
Okay, great. So members will note there is an addendum for this proposal, which includes the contents of a letter sent to councillors rebutting the council's reasons for refusal. There is also some additional comments received from Sport England, which was in response to further comments sent from the applicant. But at this time, Sport England still maintain their objection on the application due to insufficient information. So the application site comprises the existing surface level car park, which is part of the wider High Football Stadium site. The site is designated open space and is allocated for community sport use. Members will be aware that the stadium has capacity for 8,500 people, which was recently granted planning permission. There are areas of flood risk on the application site, flood zone 3A, 3B and flood zone 2, and the site lies adjacent to a site of importance for nature conservation. So the proposal seeks outline planning permission for a 5-storey multi-storey car park. This would be all matters reserved. In terms of the existing level of parking at the site, there's currently 413 parking spaces. The multi-storey car park would provide a total of 439 spaces, resulting in an uplift of 26 parking spaces. However, just as a reminder, as noted in the briefing, the other parking areas outside of the Red Line application site here to the south and adjacent to the east end, there is a lack of clarity from the applicant in respect of these parking spaces, and if these spaces were retained, there could potentially be an uplift of 205 parking spaces. So just in terms, to briefly run through the main planning issues, the development would result in the loss of some designated open space, but given the site is an existing surface level car park, it's not considered to fundamentally conflict with any open space policies. The second issue relates to the community sports pitches. The applicant has indicated the intention that the sports pitches here would need to be reorientated to facilitate the car park. Sport England have raised an objection in relation to the lack of information on how the location of the car park would impact on the ongoing use of these sports pitches. In terms of character and appearance, the development has indicated to have a maximum height of 18 metres. It's considered to be appropriate within the existing and emerging context on the application site. However, the application does fail to include full detailed parameters of the application, including details of maximum and minimum footprint, building length and width, and precisely where the development would be located on the application site. And so for this reason, officers consider there is insufficient information to assess the impact on the character and appearance of the site. In terms of traffic and parking, the application is accompanied by a transport assessment, which is over 4 years old and does fail to take into account up-to-date planning policy. Both TfL and the Council's Highways Authority have objected to the application. The proposal would exceed the maximum parking numbers permitted within the intent to draft London plan. In order to justify any deviation from the policies, the applicant would be required to demonstrate a genuine need for this, but this hasn't been done in this case. So to allow this proposal, in officers' opinion, would accept an unacceptable precedent of a non-policy compliant proposal without any supporting justification. In terms of other issues, the application fails to demonstrate policy compliance with other environmental considerations, including biodiversity and air quality. The application isn't accompanied by an up-to-date ecology assessment, and officers can't be certain that there wouldn't be any negative implications for the adjacent sink or protected species. And similarly, there is lack of information demonstrating that the development could achieve air quality neutral status. Finally, the application is accompanied by a flood risk assessment, which is out of date and doesn't take into account the siting of the multi-storey car park and considers a different part of the application site, and therefore does fail to recognise that there is existing drainage infrastructure which could potentially lead to negative flood implications for the site. The Council's Drainage Authority have objected to this. Officers have sought to work with the applicant to try and identify the issues. However, unfortunately, detailed information and technical reports haven't been provided within the time frame of this application. So for this reason, the application is recommended for refusal on the issues outlined. Happy to take any questions.
Right, I can see Christopher's hand.
Thank you, Chair. This was more of a comment really than a question. We hear constantly from TfL and the Mayor of London about modal shift. Prior to serving on the planning committee, I was on TASAP for 2 years and constantly hearing about modal shift. I can't really understand why a facility like this, which is located on good transport links, you've got bus routes, it's near a tube station. I can't see why we're building a multi-storey car park there, and I don't see how that encourages people to move out of their cars. I'm not entirely sure why it's even been called in, really.
Okay, are there any other questions? Marilyn.
Chairman, I've got comments, so if you want to just do the questions first, or up to you.
Yes, I'll do the questions first because we've
got a
we've
comment.
got the app. Okay, if there's no more questions, can I ask Mr. Mcgrath to address us for 3 minutes?
Thank you, Chair. My name is Sean Mcgrath from WSP, speaking on behalf of Football First. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight. This is a relatively straightforward application. There are currently 413 car parking spaces at the Hive. We want to provide a purpose-built multi-level car park to provide 439 spaces. In short, there's an increase of just 26 spaces. We want to stop visitors parking on surrounding streets. It really is that simple. Residents understand this and there are no objections. Unfortunately, I think officers can't see the wood for the trees, and they've come up for 6 reasons for refusal, and I'll address these now briefly. Firstly, sustainable travel. At the moment, visitors to the Hive are greeted by large car parks. We will move the car parking to a single place. We will also provide much more cycle parking, and the Hive's wider strategy will be to continue to promote walking, cycling, and the use of public transport. We have a travel plan that controls this. But in reality, we know that some people will drive, and we want them to park on site rather than on surrounding streets. Having a purpose-built facility gives us the opportunity to introduce flexible pricing, making parking even more attractive on site. Nicola mentioned about there could be an additional 200 spaces. We are more than happy to have a condition saying that we will not have any more parking than the 439 spaces. The small car park as you come in on the right hand side, that is going to become a coach park, so that will be used on match days for coaches for away supporters, which has benefits of safety and crowd control. Finally, on the sustainable transport, in the last 3 years, 26,000 square metres of new floor space has been consented at the Hive. This means that the extra 26 spaces equate to just 1 space for every 1,000 square metres of new floor space. In this context, it really doesn't seem unreasonable. Nicola mentioned about ecology and they can't be certain. The site is an existing car park. It's got no ecological value. This will not change. The sink that's referred to in the report is a Jubilee line, and we will not be impacting upon that. Thirdly, flooding and drainage. The site is in flood zone 1, and the technical drainage response that we've provided confirms that the new arrangements will improve matters. The fourth reason Sport England's concern is a realignment of the academy building and an artificial pitch. This is a non-issue. Any changes outside our red line will require planning consent. It can be controlled. The fifth reason relates to parameters. This is an outline application, but there are details provided on the submitted plans. These can be controlled by condition, and the design details will be addressed at the reserved matters stage. Finally, air quality. We're increasing the number of spaces by just 26. There is simply no measurable impact on air quality, highways or access. In summary, these are all very minor issues that can be easily dealt with by condition. This is the sort of application that should be supported. There is no harm, there are only benefits. This will be good for nearby residents, good for the Hive and good for the borough. At this time of economic hardship and economic turmoil, I'm very keen that applications like this are supported, and I do hope that you will see fit to support this application tonight, to support the Hive and help local residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mcgrath. Just before we go into comments, we're coming up to 9 o'clock. I'm not too sure what the guillotine time is for us, but in the event that it is 9 o'clock, can we agree to extend the guillotine for at least another half an hour?
Agreed.
Agree.
don't see any dissent to that. Okay, Sachin.
I think that's a bit optimistic, but I agree.
Well, we can always do it later on, but let's try and get it done as soon as we can. Sachin.
Yes, on the comment, I think I've with that speech heard it all now. It's wonderful that we've now got on record the client wants to stop people parking on the roads. They could do that without this application. The idea that that it is entirely in their control. As the ward councillor, I can tell you exactly how to do it, and you can pick up the phone to me tomorrow, and it's now on the record, so that's fine. You've been at pains to state that this is only 17 more parking spaces. Well, if you wanted to get the, that's not going to solve the problem. If you think this is going to solve the problem of people parking on the street, 17 more parking spaces, you're not understanding the problem. It's now on the record that you want people to stop parking on the road. You can do it on day one without any changes whatsoever. Pick up the phone to me tomorrow morning, and I'll tell you it all.
Marilyn.
Chairman, look, I don't take any issue with Barnet FC. I was a portfolio holder who many years ago made sure that we rejuvenated and revitalised a derelict site with weeds growing out of a derelict stadium, and it was for training and in partnership with Tony Cleandros and Barnet FC. What has happened since I was not there, and since our party no longer ran the council, is that this is the use of this site has become under the watch of Keith Ferry exponentially more active. The hub was relocated from Underhill, and then the site was sold lock, stock and barrel to Barnet and so on. And every single thing, other than a couple of items that they've ever wanted since then, has always come their way. So it doesn't surprise me an awful lot that I suppose Barnet FC must be a bit shocked that actually, unusually, the council has decided that in actual fact they're not happy with one of their proposals. It must be a revelation for Barnet FC, but it doesn't surprise me also that one of its greatest fans, Councillor Ferry, has pulled this in. Haven't got a clue why, but there you go. And trying to, I don't know what, quite frankly, I suppose it's nice to have a debate about it, but the thing is, this is the problem. The bottom line is this, and this is really talking about the planning policy side of this. Whatever anyone can say, there are 6 reasons, long, very detailed and sustainable reasons for refusal. 6. And fundamentally, the most compelling one is this is completely non-compliant in terms of our traffic management policies. It's non-compliant with the draft London plan, and also to a lesser extent with the existing London plan. It's non-compliant with our local policies. We are trying very hard as a borough, although it won't be possible to achieve this completely, to get people to use other forms of transport than the motor car. And building this whacking great big multi-storey car park certainly won't contribute to that. I'm actually, frankly, flabbergasted that this has come to the committee. I'm actually concerned, frankly, as to why it has in fact come. Because thus far, it has always been the case that Councillor Ferry has been a massive, passionate of every single thing that Barnet FC have ever wanted. But this time, the professional wing have come to the conclusion, rightly in my view, that it's not to be on this occasion. And that's exactly right. It's not to be on this occasion. Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment? No. I can tell you why it's called in. It's because for the past few years, we've had an unwritten policy that any application which is refused by the officers doesn't come before the committee. I discussed this with the Chief Planning Officers several months ago, and I believe that by not having the opportunity to discuss major applications which are about to be refused, not only stops us from having a say in what happens, but it also can in some instances stop us going into a very long, lengthy and costly appeal process. So this is a change in, if you like, practice, that we will no longer allow large applications, major applications, to go to an officer's recommendation for refusal before the local elected representatives to have a chance to discuss it. I mean, there's been several recent cases where things have gone straight to the inspectorate without the ability for this committee to examine them, and they've been passed by the inspectorate. I'm thinking of one particular in Hatch End, where it was completely unacceptable. The appeal was granted with the exception of one condition which related to car parking. When it came back to the committee, we were then forced to pass it because they had they managed to discharge the condition to the satisfaction of the highway section. So I'm not apologising for bringing this to the committee, but it will be one of a long series of refusals, which I think in the past it's been quite wrong to have not passed past the committee before it goes to appeal. So that's the reason it's here. Are there any other comments? Not, we can move to the vote. Marilyn.
Chairman, so I just want to get this straight, and please forgive me, I'm not digressing. You've made a more general comment. So I'm the Conservative spokesman on the Planning Committee, and one would have thought if you were going to change the delegation regime, as it were, the system that we use, which I think is what you're saying, and I wouldn't disagree with you, one would have thought that thus far you might have had a conversation with me about it or something, but you haven't. And therefore, with respect, I do not think that's the real reason why you've called this in.
I can remember long enough ago to remember when, Marilyn, you were in charge of the planning committee, and we had quite a few applications come before the planning committee, which the officers had recommended for refusal. The protocol.
That is correct, Chairman.
Well, I can remember quite a few that came.
That is
certainly
correct.
A few.
But I just want to make the point that if you're changing the scale of delegation, and that because I agree with you, which is why I called him and just gave him, and I'm not arguing about that. It just seems odd that something like this you wouldn't have bothered to talk to your counterpart. There are 28 Conservative councillors, and I'm their spokesman for our side. But be that as it may, I do not think that's why you called this in.
Well, I can assure you that it was discussed with the Chief Planning Officer many months ago, even before this application was lodged, that all major applications, which are a matter of opinion rather than against any dyed-in-the-wall planning policy, should come before the committee. And I thought you would have agreed that having more democratic oversight of planning applications was better rather than less. Anyway, let's move to the vote.
This is contrary to policy, Chairman.
We can continue this somewhere else. I'm quite happy to have a discussion with you somewhere else about this.
Beverly, I very much doubt what you're saying is right.
Well, since the last application we were talking about was also put down for refusal and you called it in, I can't see that you're disagreeing with me. So if we move to the vote, I've heard all of the discussions. Sorry, who's that? Right, I've heard all of the discussions, and my vote is to abstain. Cassandra.
I have heard all the discussion and the proceedings, and I vote to refuse.
Sachin?
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussions and debate. I vote to refuse.
Kieran?
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani, I've heard all the discussions and I vote to refuse.
Marilyn?
I've heard all the discussions and I vote to refuse, Chair.
Christopher?
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussions and I vote to refuse.
And Jana?
Councillor Anjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse this application.
Okay, so that application is refused, and we move on to 101. This is the first of the ones that don't have any members of the public addressing us. Can we move straight to questions for officers, please? Are there any questions for officers on this application? Can't see any. Then if we could move to the vote. All those in favour of, where are we? Granting this application. I've heard all of the discussion, such as it was, and vote to grant the application. Cassandra.
Councillor Ghazanfar Ali, I heard all the discussion and I vote to grant application. Thank you.
Sachin.
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
Kieran.
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani, I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant the application.
Marilyn.
Yes, Chair, I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant, and the reason why we haven't had a discussion about this is because there isn't anything to add. Thank you.
Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Jana.
Councillor Anjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant. What happened?
Thank you very much. So item 101 is granted, and we move on to item 203, Avondale Lodge, Pinnacles Close. Again, we've had a full briefing. Are there any questions?
Yes, sorry, Chair, please. I would like to add a condition to the existing conditions. We would like to add additional condition in relation to having all the windows on the side elevations to be obscure glazed and non-opening to a height of 1.7 meters. If we would delegate the authority to us, we can add that condition. We can add a suitably worded condition to that effect. Thank you.
Right. Are there any questions? Are there any comments? Marilyn.
Thank you, Chairman. As you know, this is in my ward and I wasn't on the planning committee when it was originally granted. Look, I wish people well and I'm sure they'll be very happy. It's a lovely road and a nice part of the world. Just that I don't really think that the original building or the original application was particularly delicate, shall we say, and I don't think it does very much for the conservation area, which is very nearby. Had I been on the committee when the original application would have come in, I would not have voted for it. However, unless I've misunderstood the briefing, and we had a very, very good briefing about this one anyway, I can't really see that this makes matters, with all due respect, any worse. it is slightly different, but it doesn't really change it. So I'm happy to go along with it in a way. But I have to say that I'm not delighted by the overall design. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any other comments, discussion? If not, we move to the vote. I've heard all of the discussions and I vote to grant approval for this.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Rosen for early. I heard all the discussion and I vote to grant. Thank you.
Sachin.
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Kieran.
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani, I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
Marilyn.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
Christopher.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Anjana.
Councillor Ranjana Patel, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
So that item is granted and we have no item 204, which have been withdrawn from the agenda. So 205, Cannons High School. Again, we've had a briefing on this. Are there any questions to officers? Small infill. No. Are there any comments? Don't see any. If we could move to the vote then. I've heard all of the discussion, such as it was, and I vote to grant the application.
Councillor Rosen for early. I heard all the discussion and vote to grant the application. Thank you.
Sachin.
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
Kieran.
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani, I've heard all the discussions and I vote to grant.
Marilyn.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion. Vote to grant.
And Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant.
And Anjana. Have we lost Anjana?
Sorry, no, you haven't. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant. My battery was running low, so it won't let me come in.
Okay. All right. 207, land rear of Station House, Masons Avenue. Again, we've had a briefing on this. Do we have any questions to officers? Any comments? Marilyn.
Chairman, I'm sorry, I know the hour's late, or it could be late, but we've been at this a little bit too long, I suppose. And I'm concerned about this. And I understand it's in the intensification area, I get that. And I understand that the existing building faces to the side, overlooking an empty plot, and further along, those whacking great big tower blocks that said it can't grow granted over our head. So I understand where this is, and I get that you're not going to have exactly a picturesque view, or you're not going to necessarily be able all the time to sit out on your Juliet balcony sunbathing. I get all that, and I'm realistic. But the thing that troubles me, and I obviously have got myself perhaps a little confused, but I don't think so. We have an existing building here. It was there. It's been there a while, called Richfield House, and you have all of the windows facing in that direction. For whatever reason, that is what we gave them permission for. Or if we didn't give it, the inspectorate did. It's authorised. I think we gave it. So that building is legitimate, people living there facing that way. If you look at the plan or the picture, of, the mock-up of it or whatever, you'll see that there's not much of a gap between the building and the windows in this five-story. I think I'm echoing a bit. Somebody switched their microphone off. That's better. It's just awkward. In this 5-story high building. And this building, which is going to be very nearby, just at the other side of where that sort of narrow opening is going to be 4 stories high. And it already says in the report really clearly that there will be a reduction in daylight. They don't mean sunlight, that's a different matter, but it's going to make the very important primary windows and rooms and Juliet balconies a lot darker. And it will be quite a significant loss of amenity. Now, unless I've completely got this back to front, and I don't think I have, I had a jolly good read of the Harrow and Wilson Area Action Plan, and I couldn't see anywhere in it that actually prescribed that we must, where there are existing buildings with people living in them that are established unauthorised, with Juliet balconies and windows that get a reasonable amount of daylight, that we can put a building of this scale in such close proximity to that building. It's not about having a view, that we will make a number of those rooms, and we're talking about up to the 4th floor, a lot darker. I think that is completely out of order. I think it is bad planning, and frankly, I think that even if you do live in an intensification area, and even if you haven't got a lot of money, and even if that's the only thing you can afford to live in, and believe me, I'm sure they're very nice flats, and I'm sure the people that live there are lovely people, you are entitled not to have to spend your days with artificial lights on, particularly in the winter months. And so, Chairman, I'm sorry, I'm going to be proposing refusal on this, because I don't think, even if you are living in this part of Harrow, that we should do this to you. I think this existing building must carry a precedent over future developments, particularly when there's going to be a significant loss of light. And I think it's a human right, actually, to have a reasonable amount of daylight coming into your home. So the reason for refusal is followed. The development, by reason of its close proximity and orientation to Bridgefield House, and given its height and scale, would be detrimental to the amenities of the occupiers of Bridgefield House and would cause a noticeable and unacceptable reduction in daylight into the habitable rooms thereof, contrary to Harrow Core Strategy DS1 2012, London Plan 2016, 3.5, 7.2 and 7.6. Draft London Plan 2019, D1, D4, D5, D7, Harrow Development Management Policies, DM1, DM2, DM27, DM28, and the Harrow and Wealdstone Area Action Plan 2013, AAP4. And Chairman, I'd like, with all of the refusals that I've proposed tonight, by the way, in the minutes to be recorded as having refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Christopher, do you wish to second that?
Yes, Chair, I just raised my hand to say that I'd like to second that motion.
Okay, so if we can move to the vote, we have a motion to refuse this application. I'll vote first. My vote is that I vote against the motion to refuse the application, having heard everything.
Councillor Ali, I've heard all the discussion, and I vote against the refusal.
Sachin?
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussion and I vote against the motion for refusal.
Kieran?
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani. I've heard all the discussion and I vote against the motion to refuse.
And Marilyn?
I've heard all the discussion. I vote for the motion to refuse.
Christopher?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I vote for the motion for refusal.
And Anjana?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote against. I vote for the refusal.
Okay, so that is 4 votes against refusal and 3 votes for, so the motion for refusal fails. On the application itself, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to approve the application. Samantha?
Councillor Harrison early, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant the application.
Sachin?
Councillor Sachin Shah, I've heard all the discussion. I vote to approve the application.
Kieran?
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to approve the application.
Marilyn?
I've heard all the discussion. I vote to refuse the application.
Christopher?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse the application.
And Anjana?
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to refuse the application.
Okay, so by my reckoning, that's 4 votes to approve the application, 3 against. So that application is approved. We move on to item 208, 42 Chartley Avenue. Against, we've had a full briefing on Monday and Tuesday about this. Are there any questions to officers? Are there any comments? Marilyn?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Chair, I called this in, and the reason why is because originally the case officer was going to refuse this, because as you know, we rightly, under your chairman, adopted a supplementary planning document on garden grabbing. And unfortunately, the London plan, the draft London plan under Sadiq Khan takes out the ability of local authorities so to do, whereas we were under the previous one, the adopted one, encouraged to do so. So I was very happy that the case officer decided this was garden grabbing and was going to refuse it. He asked if he could do it under delegated powers, and of course I said yes. And then, about a day later, I got another email to say, sorry, actually, we're going to recommend grant. Well, that upset me a little bit because I was confused as to why. And I think the reason why became more apparent at the briefing, because this apparently is what they call a gap plot as opposed to garden area. So, as I say, being a very thorough sort of person, I had a proper look at this. And I have to say, I do think that the officers are right, because there is no number 44 Chartley Avenue. And I do apologise, actually, I hadn't realised that. So what this is actually, it's a bit like having a tooth missing. It's a gap in the road and not really a garden, although it appears to be a garden when you're in the street. I think it's unfortunate that this has come in, and the reason why is because it is an outline planning permission. And outline planning permissions are fraught with problems, because if this is granted, what it will do is it will simply establish a principle that this is a gap plot as opposed to garden, but it doesn't really tell us an awful lot about exactly what will be there. However, the indicative drawings are for a house, but that's not really how it's going to look. It's just a child's drawing of a house. So I'm going to say now, Chairman, that I will keep a watching brief on all the reserved matters, because unless I've got this wrong, this is for access only. And I think we must be very careful that the House, when it does come in with all the reserved matters, is tastefully designed, in keeping and proportionate given the size of the plot. Chairman, that's why I called this in. And no, I think the officers have got it
Okay.
right. But I'm a little
I think
bit.
we got the message. If there's no other comments, can we move straight to the vote then? I'll start off. I've heard all the discussion and I vote to agree the recommendations to approve. Kasantha.
Councillor Ali, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to grant approval.
Sachin.
Councillor Sachin, I've heard all the discussion. I vote to grant.
Kieran.
Councillor Kieran Ramchandani, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to approve.
Marilyn.
Thank you, Chair. I've heard all the discussion and I abstain.
Christopher.
Councillor Christopher Baxter, I've heard all the discussion and I vote to abstain.
And Jana.
I've heard all the discussion and I vote to abstain.
Okay, so we have 4 votes for approval, three abstentions, so that that particular one is granted. And there is no other urgent business, so the meeting is concluded by my clock 21:29. I'd like to thank all members of the committee for staying with it for so long. We haven't had such a long meeting for a long time, and I think we've managed to get over the technical problems and the problems of a very long and detailed planning committee. I'd also like to thank the officers and particularly Andre in the IT for managing to keep us on track. Once again, I think we had the first virtual meeting which proves that teams could work, and we've had the first virtual meeting where we've had a problem, but we realise that we can now go back and fill in the gaps when we want to. I did say to Andre it would be possible to fast forward it so we could have finished at 8 o'clock, but apparently that is not part of the IT anymore. So thank you very much. Good night and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thanks to Andre, very helpful.